Everybody just please turn their microphones on. Good evening, everybody. Today is December 18th, 2017, and we're gathered here for a first work session with the council and then a budget hearing from the school committee. So if I could ask everybody to please stand with us in joining for the pledge of the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Dale, could I have the roll call, please? Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, under new business. Item A is a resolution for an appointment as the town manager for the town of South Kingstown, effective January 16th, 2018. Do I have a resolution to appoint Robert Zarnetsky?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition? Seeing none, congratulations, Rob. Welcome to South Kingstown. And before I might ask you to come up to speak, we have one more. Item number 4B, which is a resolution approving the prospective town manager's employment agreement for fiscal year 2018 and authorizing the town council president to execute the agreement and all personnel action documents as further described in a memorandum from the town solicitor to the town council dated December 13th and entitled Town Manager's Contract.
I'll make a motion approving item 4B as presented.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Seeing no opposition, motion carries. At this point, Rob, if you wanted to just come up to the podium, you don't have to, but if you wanted to just come up to the podium and say a little bit about yourself.
I don't want to talk about myself, but I do want to thank you. And I want to let this council know and the employees here in the room and residents of the town know that I will do everything I can to be worthy of the trust that you've put in me tonight. I've been incredibly impressed with the work product that I've been reviewing over the last few weeks. This is clearly a town administration that knows what it's doing and does it incredibly well. And I will do everything I can to keep the train running on time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Moving on to item number 5, discussion and solicitation of comments from the public relating to the general school. Do we need to do this now or afterwards? Oh, so then we'll take us. Do I have a motion to move to a recess?
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
The meeting will be recessed until 7 p.m.
Provide a starting point for budget development to look at some of the factors that will weigh into the decisions that we can make, those that we can control, and those that would take major changes in our programs to be able to provide adjustments. Third, it's to solicit from the public any comments that they have relative to the council's adopted goals and objectives for the 18-19 year, and also then for the council to be able to set direction in terms of budget preparation objectives that they would like to see initiated. The budget development process requires the advertisement for the call of tonight's meeting. That was done on December 14th in the edition of the Independent. The meeting is scheduled and is also available as far as the background information on the town's website. The budget adoption process requires first the preparation of a summary of budget process, which is what we're going through tonight. I'm not going to walk through each of the different dates, but the dates are important for us to stay in compliance with the charter requirements. Essentially, what we're looking to do is to have a management budget from the town side developed to look at what budget requirements will be. The town manager will issue that budget to the council for their consideration no later than March 1st. That budget will include a recommendation from the town manager as to the level of tax transfer that will be proposed and recommended for transfer to the school fund. The school committee is required under the charter by February 14th to be able to submit their budget request to the manager for consideration with his March 1 delivery. The council then conducts the various hearings between March 1st and March 22nd, and the council must adopt a preliminary budget on or before March 22nd. Between the 23rd and April 18th, the council is required by charter to hold 2 public hearings with the school committee on the preliminary budget. This provides an opportunity for the council to present the values that are incorporated into that budget and to address questions from the general public, as well as the school community on funding levels. Between March 23rd and April 21st, members of the public with 25 signatures can have a petition filed seeking revisions to the council's preliminary budget. That requires 25 signatures with no dollar amount as a minimum or a maximum. The council, upon receipt of a valid petition, must act on that petition, either to vote it up, down, modify it, or to reject it. The council then adopts a final budget on or before May 1st. After May 1st, qualified electors with 200 signatures asking for a budget adjustment of no less than $250,000 have the opportunity to submit a referendum question, which would go to all-day referendum. After verification of such a petition, it would go to an all-day session, which would be on the second Tuesday after the first Monday in June. Based on the conclusions of what the decisions are made in that referendum, can provide for modification to the council's budget, which would begin as of July 1. The next chart shows the meeting schedule that we anticipate the council holding, all open for public participation. As noted, the first is dealing with capital budget. Capital budget this year will be scheduled for consideration and review on the 3rd, 4th, and 10th of January. And council, by charter, is required to adopt a capital improvement program no later than February 1st. We're anticipating that that will be conducted during the regular council meeting on January 22nd. It's important to note that while a budget can be adopted for the capital budget, which is a component of the capital improvement program, it doesn't necessarily have to be what the capital budget will be in the council's final budget. There are years where we have adopted a proposed capital improvement program and needed to reduce that prior to the adoption of the final operating budget. So while the original adoption of the capital improvement program is looked at as a vision of what the expenses should be for capital improvements, it may in fact need to be scaled back even though it's been adopted on or before February 1st, when it becomes a component of the council's operating budget. The rest of the schedule shows each of the different meeting nights that we anticipate for conclusion of the budget process ending on or about May 1st. Second element that's important tonight is the council's goals and objectives. The town council adopted goals and objectives last year, earlier this year on February 13th. In accordance with the charter, this public hearing provides an opportunity for the council to begin its review of those goals and objectives. In advance of the first meeting in January, which would be on January 8th, the council has from staff recommendations for consideration or revisions or updates on the two-year adopted goals and objectives, where what we're attempting to do is to provide updates or where items have been completed to document what the next steps will be. We'll ask the council on the 8th to adopt any revisions to the goals and objectives as a means of using those goals and objectives by the department directors in justifying expenditure requests for the 2018-19 fiscal year. As listed on the board, currently there are 12 stated goals. What we have suggested mostly is to adjust where we better define what the goal versus the objectives are, because the goals should be strategic, long-term, and defining a vision, where the objectives should more be specific and measurable, that we can establish as metrics when we start looking at cost of program. I want to talk for a couple of minutes about the landscape in which this budget works. First is that I want it clear that the property tax levy cap in Rhode Island is a cap. It is not a goal in the development of a budget. And I say this because many times people say, well, if the state allows you to raise taxes by 4%, you should. Well, that's not the case. What we should be adopting budgets to is where there's an ability to pay and a need in terms of the programs and services that are necessary, whether they be of a school nature or they be of a municipal nature. And it's up to the council to make the determinations based on how they envision the needs of the community being addressed. It's not a case where either municipal staff, school staff, or the school committee are able to establish what that value is. The accountability based on a representative democracy is that the council is responsible for tax dollars and in determining the value levels for each. We are expecting an unassigned fund balance to stay at around 13.5%. Target that we use as a goal in the community is between 12 and 16%, so we're where we should be. We need to be able to maintain that level, and in the development of the budget, we'll consider what steps are necessary to ensure that we do not see decline within the fund balance held by the town. We're also looking at what does the tax roll look like. I'll show you a sheet in a couple of minutes, but bottom line is I'm anticipating there'll be a $30 million value increase in the roll. That $30 million value would generate about $460,000 in new tax dollars with the program being able to stand still. So in other words, we can generate, without a tax rate increase, another $460,000. The number on the $30,000 is still a conservative number that we will be looking at through the budget process prior to the March 1st recommendation coming to the council. It is important to note, too, that there's negotiation of labor contracts for 3 of the municipal units in town. We have 4 municipal units plus an unorganized group. 3 of those are subject to negotiation for contracts beginning July 1st of 2018. Normal contracts can go as long as a 3-year period. For budget consideration purposes, we are looking at a cost of living of approximately 2% in the salary adjustments that would be considered going forward in the negotiation of those preliminary discussions with the units. It is important for us also to consider that a part of our budget process is to deal with both municipal and school debt. Municipal and school debt service payments this year will amount to about $1.1 million in property tax. That's pretty stable at about a $6,300 increase over the current year, so we don't see problems with being able to deal with that. The town also continues to meet and should continue to meet its full cost on the annual required contributions for post-employment benefits and the contributions that go into that trust fund. To give you an idea, right now, the OPEB liability for the South Kingstown schools and municipal government stands at about $18.8 million. Of that, actual assets are $11.9 million, so we have only a net liability of about $7 million. That means that we're 63% funded, which is probably one of the highest funding levels in the state. We need to continue on both the municipal and the school side to continue to make payments into that program. We were at 55% last year, and getting to 63 is an impressive number. Contributions that'll be necessary to maintain annual required contributions will be about $425,000 to $525,000 on the municipal side, and about $175,000 on the school budget. Schools liability overall is about $8.8 million, and the town's about 10. Most of this is tied up in benefits for health care in post-employment positions. The liability is down somewhat from what it had been 2 years ago. So we're making considerable progress in addressing annual required contributions on OPEB, and that should be a continuing objective in any responsible budget development. I wanted to also just mention that the state conducts two hearings at the state level to look at what economic landscape is for the state. The November economic forecast that was put out, which included representations from House, Senate, Governor's office, as well as the Budget office, is suggesting increases over the next 5 years in personal income growth, as well as seeing that the consumer price index will continue to increase. The information, to me, is suggesting far greater growth than I think can be anticipated unless there's major job growth in this state that is of a plus $65,000 to $70,000 range, which we're not seeing a great deal of. I am concerned, I think as everybody is, that the estimating conference also suggested that the state was running at about a $60 million shortfall for the current year, and that going forward that there was as much as a $200 million concern on being able to develop the state budget for the 18-19 year. Operational department over expenditures at the state level continue to plague that budget process. The activity that the governor put forward in terms of an early retirement program has not met its target, which means that there will be the potential for greater shortfall in the current year, which then increases the base. What they're also finding is that a number of the people that are taking advantage of the early incentive program are full replacements, and it's not jobs that will go unfilled. The other thing that we're looking at is that next year's budget looks at both increases in school operations support and increases in school construction support, none of which is coming to South Kingstown, by the way, because we're still in the 8th year of the 10-year formula introduction. But if those increases are loaded into the budget, something will have to give. Many times what we see that gives is the support at the municipal level or at the school levels. We are anticipating the second year of the 5-year motor vehicle phase-out program. If that occurs, we will see additional erosion in our tax base, while we'll see an increase, a neutral increase in the value of state income, state aid that comes to the municipality. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go forward. Just a snapshot in terms of unemployment in South Kingstown. State unemployment's running at around the 3% level. We're at about 2.9% as of September of 17. Again, one of my concerns has always been, and we'll talk about this in the capital budget meetings, is the number of jobs that are available. The rate is less important to me than the number of jobs that are available within the community and the people looking for work. So as we see the rate drop, but we also see the number of jobs seekers drop, it means that the economy isn't moving in the direction that you want to see it. And we're continuing to see that there is an erosion in the number of people looking for work to the number of jobs that are filled at this point. So the 2.9 may sound like great news, but it doesn't necessarily follow that that is going to provide greater personal income within the community. A snapshot that is important to look at is how things have changed over the last 5 years. And what we want to look at in the general revenue statement for the general fund is where were we and where are we now? So over a 5-year period, we've seen about a $3.8 million increase in that budget. And what we're seeing is that that local revenues are down $950,000. Well, that's not an accurate statement. What we changed over the last 5 years is that we identified the general fund and took out of the general fund debt service programming. So that meant that all of the revenue, which was about $1.3 million in revenue in the 2012-13 year, were removed because they were brought directly into the debt service fund, which means that while we lost $950,000 in that category over the 5-year period, we actually gained $350,000. So when you look at the value of property taxes, we're seeing an average increase of about 1.55% over that period of time. What we're also looking at is that that state aid is showing that it's increased. It's lost only $84,000, but recognize that the motor vehicle phase-out was worth $325,000 in the current year, which means that that's a negative, and we would be over $400,000 in loss over that 5-year period. When we look at the transfers to the school fund, you can see that over the 5-year period, the increase has only been 1.64%. Going back the 5 years, we had the first year was at 1.6, the second year was at 1, the following year was at 1.4, then it went up to 2.1 and 2.0. And I'm sure that school department will reference that as we go forward this evening. But I think that if we move on to the next page, the real question comes always as to where does the money come from when it comes from property tax? And the answer is that you can see that the percentage in 2016-17, that 83, almost 84% of all of the property taxes were coming from residential based property. And that has increased up to 84.5% in the current year, 17-18. You can see that we're going to be seeing reductions in the value associated with motor vehicles, because as the phase-out occurs, there's an erosion in the taxable property values, but there's an increase in the state revenue that offsets it. So if we gain $350,000 in state aid, we lose $350,000 in property taxes collected from motor vehicles. So there is no gain associated with the phase-out. While it's been played that it's providing value, what it's doing is it's matching the value that's lost to the income that's generated. I'm also, as I said, concerned as far as whether the state will be able to continue that phase-out for a 5-year period. If you recall, last summer, the budget was held hostage for about a 60-day period, and much of that discussion was on the phase-out of the motor vehicles and what the implications were, not just in a 1-year period, but over a 5-year period. The next page looks at what town experience has been to date, and here's where we were, I was just referencing. When we look at the 17-18 tax distribution, over 75% goes to school purpose at this point. The remainder, at the 25%, goes to municipal purpose. Now, when we say school share, it's important to note that that's not just the tax transfer to the school fund, but also the tax transfer to the school debt. So that's why we're seeing, but from a pure municipal versus school function, that's what the ratio is at this point. But you can also see that we're talking about a 1.4% increase on average over that 5-year period. So I think that there's been some conservative management that's gone forward in terms of managing local property tax dollar in relation to what the community's ability to pay is. When we deal with the capital budget next month, we will look a little bit deeper in terms of what the implications on ability to pay are and why it's important for us to preserve conservative themes as a means of allowing people to remain in town that may not be able to afford to live in the community if taxes were to generate on about a 4% per year. Every year, I get questions about why is a community different from South Kingstown in terms of their values. And I put this chart together last year for the first time. People want comparisons, and I'm going to tell you, when you look at this, there is no such thing as a comparison when you look at municipalities, particularly in the southern Rhode Island. The reason I say that is that comparisons would require uniformity in both population, land size, development mix from a zoning perspective, and from personal income. Because each community has a different standards when it comes to each of those 5 elements, you're really going to be comparing apples to bananas when you try to say, well, how does one affect the other? As a for instance, South Kingstown's entire tax base is $4.6 billion, yet Narragansett's is $4.6 billion as well. So what that does is it allows Narragansett to be able to have a much lower tax rate since its value of taxable property is equal to ours. North Kingstown shows that it only has $4.1 billion. Well, the reason why is because the property at Quonset isn't taxable. It's under a payment in lieu of tax agreement. So, and when you look at Westerly, because of the values that are associated with the waterfronts, you can see that their value is up at a $5.8 billion level. And Charleston, being a smaller rural community, you can see what you have. But when you look at this too, you look and you say, okay, well, where do they get the taxes from? You can see the differences where 90% is coming in Narragansett to 82%. When you look at the tax levy, which is the 3rd line from the bottom, you can see that the tax levy that we're generating $70 million, where North Kingstown, which has a much smaller taxable base, is generating 75, plus that 75 is not inclusive of what they get through pilots. My point is that when you look at this, people will say, well, gee, why is the tax rate cheaper in Narragansett than it is in South Kingstown? When you get to the bottom line, the cost per capita in South Kingstown is only $2,300. Yet in Narragansett it would be over $3,000 and Westerly over $3,000. So again, it's not the rate that counts, it's the levy amount that's being used and whether or not there's other sources of revenue that are non-property tax through a pilot program that can make a difference. Second page here looks at also some other conditions when we look at direct debt. As you can see, our direct debt's around $14 million, where Narragansett is 26 and North Kingstown 54 million. Obviously, if you've got a $54 million value as far as indebtedness, your debt service requirements are going to take a much larger portion of your tax roll. It's important to note that South Kingstown is the only one of the communities that has a AA1 rating. And a good reason for that is the manner in which we do manage debt and what we attempt to do is to bring debt into our schedules in a manner that allows declining debt service payments to be offset by new debt that's being incurred. I'll talk about that a little bit later when we look at the debt service schedules. When I look at the overall debt to assessment value, which I don't have on this chart, I looked at this later on, Westerly's debt ratio was up at 1.4%, but that's because they got an $86 million in debt as a comparison to our $14 million. So again, what I stress here is you need to look at your own community rather than what the other community has, because there's such differences in terms of how they generate their income and the size. South Kingstown's cost associated with busing is far greater than any other community based on the land mass that we're serving. That comes into the school budget as a value which is going to make that atypical to those other communities. So there has to be greater scrutiny when somebody brings forward a comparison to another community, because what you really need to do is to be able to ask the questions and on your own community to determine whether there is a proper value that's being had. Next item I wanted to mention is state aid to the general fund. State aid's been relatively flat over the last few years. The only change that we're seeing is on the motor vehicles. As you can see on this chart, we had budgeted $139,000 in revenue from motor vehicles from the state. Based on the Article, on the Article 11 changes that went in the budget in August, it increased the amount of income from that program by $341,000. What we were also required to do is to give back $341,000 in property taxes from the motor vehicles. So it had no impact on the budget for the 17-18 year. We're anticipating that it will climb by another $139,000 if the second year of the phase-out is included, which would bring our totals up to about $623,000. So it looks like a great number, but the $623,000 is offset by the loss of of approximately $483,000 that has been taken off of the motor vehicle roll. So don't be fooled by seeing increased state aid if in fact there's a requirement that the property levy be reduced by an equal dollar amount. The next page just gives a snapshot as to where state aid was on the general fund and where it is today. You can see it was up as high as about $4.45 million in 2007, with steady erosion that occurred. One of the things I've always preached is the fact that there really is no state aid. What there is our taxpayers' money that's sent to Providence, and only a small portion of it comes back. And I think that's a theme that needs to be continued to be brought forward, because for some reason, income tax and sales tax is as much of a local revenue as dealing with hotels or meals. And it should be looked at in that same manner. And there should be a greater equity distribution provided back to the cities and towns in Rhode Island. I mentioned that we're anticipating about a $30 million growth in the tax roll. That, as I said, is a conservative estimate at this point. But even if we pick up another million or two, it's not going to make a substantial difference in terms of the targets that we're setting in establishing the budget. And you can see we're anticipating, with the continued erosion on the motor vehicles, that there'll be about another $15 million decline in value. I'm not saying that's bad. What I'm saying is that as we reduce the roll, it's good that there's going to be less money that's required on property tax that's for motor vehicles. The problem I have with it is that since our rate is $18.71, and some of the urban areas are at $70 and $80, they're getting 3 times as much value back as we are with the $18.71. Again, it's a question of equity. The car should be the same valued in terms of return to the community, whether it's Providence or whether it's South Kingstown. When we look at preliminary expenditure considerations, I want you to know what we're working with at the staff level at this point. I mentioned that we're looking at 3 contracts that need to be negotiated. We're forecasting a projected COLA of about 2%. We have the third year of the police contract, which will run through June of 19, where we've got a 2.5% increase that is budgeted, as well as for the police captains with us too, at about 2.75%. That may sound high, but when we did an evaluation as to what our salary levels were in comparison with other departments, there was a necessity for those types of adjustments. One thing that we have tried to do at the municipal level is to recognize what positions values are. And if we're underpaying, we look to make those adjustments. It can't be made sometimes just through the cost of living adjustments for these positions. We are looking to add 1 new full-time position. Again, we would start at 6 months into the year. Estimated cost would be about $26,000, and that would be in park maintenance. I think the council is well aware of the important efforts that have been made in terms of providing enhanced services, in terms of roadside maintenance, highway maintenance, as well as in each of our parks programs. Over the last few years, we've picked up additional acreages that we're mowing. We're also picking up additional trash. That takes labor, and we can't do it with the current levels. By starting it in January, it will assist us also in ensuring that we've got another snow route that will be covered with a permanent driver. We're also restructuring several positions within the finance department itself. Estimated savings will be about $35,000 there. A portion of that is just based on greater efficiencies within the department, some of which is caused by taking better use of the financial management systems that we operate with to allow us to be able to reduce labor costs, yet at the same time recognizing where reclassifications are necessary for services that are rendered. Many changes have occurred in the finance department over the past 3 years with the changes in our financial management systems, and Trish has done a wonderful job in terms of restructuring that department. And part of the efforts that she's made will see additional savings again in the 18-19 year with the changes that we are planning. There are upgrades that are necessary for several positions. Finance and accounting administrator, job responsibilities have changed over the last 3 years. What we're looking at is a grounds foreman, which is really acting as an assistant grounds superintendent, and we're looking to make the necessary adjustments outside of the contracts themselves. And we're also looking at park maintenance technicians, which are underclassified at this point in relation to the Public Works Department with similar job responsibilities and certification requirements. So we are proposing to make those types of changes and adjustments in addition to the COLAs that will be necessary in any of the contract negotiations. Moving on, when we look at the revenues, I've talked enough about the motor vehicles. We're expecting about $140,000 change in terms of additional aid, but again, that'll be offset by the loss on the property tax. Non-property tax revenues, which are the local revenues, we'll see probably about a $75,000 increase. Some of that's on fees collected within the town clerk's office with real estate and recording fees. I've talked about the state aid. I'm not going to go through that again. Unassigned fund balance in the past, we've used $600,000. At 3 years ago, it was up at $1 million, and we've reduced that down to 600. I'd like to see it reduced further than that, but until we get deeper into the budget, I'm not sure that may need to be a mainstay at the 600 with no change. As I've mentioned, the net taxable increase based on new growth in the roll of the 30 million would be about $460,000. Having said all that, then we get to the pro forma. When I look at a pro forma, I want to put some qualifications on it. A pro forma, to me, is a starting point in a budget development process. This estimate reflects, what we're seeing here reflects expenditures based on department directors' requests. These are not final numbers, but these are what departments have been submitting. Major departments like police and recreation have yet to submit their lines, so we've just provided a general forecast on those. Our budget process provides for the department directors to first initiate budget line items. Second, for the finance director to review those in place, compare those against expenditures over the past 5 years, and make appropriate adjustments. And then third and finally, for the manager's office to review and to make those adjustments that he may find appropriate after reviewing the findings of the finance director. In addition, as we go through the pro forma, the revenue statement has not been first line developed at this point. It's really been a case of me just taking a look at general trends and forecasting from that. But essentially, if everything is done that we're talking about being done and presented in that budget document, it would require about a 3.5% increase, or about $825,000. This would be withholding agency contributions to no increase. Again, at $194,000, if there's increases there, it's going to add to the bottom line as well. This looks to all of the personnel costs that are anticipated, plus the benefit increases. When we look at personnel costs, again, we're going to be seeing not just the COLA, but step increases as well that would be in place for people moving through a step plan. When we look at benefits, we're going to be looking at an 8% targeted increase in health care. We're going to be looking at marginal increases in retirement costs and an 8% increase associated with dental. Those costs are some of the costs that are not going to allow adjustments to the budget without changes in personnel loading, because you have to pay those dollars based on the contracts that you have, or you need to let the people go as a means of making the reductions. And I'm going to show you a little bit more on that, but first let me just talk about that revenue statement. Again, it's a preliminary revenue statement. The only determining factor for current property tax levy is subtracting all other revenues from what the bottom line is of the expenditure statement. So at this point, it's nothing more than where would we be if everything we had in place today would impact us? Well, it would be about a 1.9% increase. And this would mean that we were giving 2% to the schools as far as the transfer over the current year appropriation level. When we look at the revenues, you can see still almost 68% of our entire budget would be coming out of the property tax source itself. The unassigned balance at that 600 would be less than 3%. And the school transfers, this is the money that the schools reimburse the general fund for the police officer in the school, as well as field maintenance, those types of things. State revenues, as well as payment in lieu of taxes. So there's not a lot of dollars that are available outside of that property tax base. The next page is, it's the first time I'm showing you this page. This page is let's take a look at the expenditure statement in a different way. Let's look at it based on what the cost of salary is. So if we give the 2% salary increase, we deal with the step adjustments, we deal with the changes in personnel that I listed, we'd see about a 2.6% increase in the cost of salary. When we look at retirement, it'd be about a 4.6% increase, and you can see the health care at 12.9. I said that the increase was expected at 8. It is expected at 8, but as we hire different people, if we hire somebody who requires family coverage versus the person who left having individual coverage, we pick up the difference between those, the individual coverage. What we end up with is that based on the personnel complement that's in place today, or the anticipated to be in place for the 18-19 year, we're looking at about a 13% overall increase associated with health care next year. When we get done with all of the personnel costs in and by themselves would be at about a 4.2% increase over the base budget for the current year. And again, the only way we adjust those is to reduce personnel. There is no other way around it unless we were changing benefit structures. Right now, as far as healthcare is concerned, 20% of healthcare dollars are paid by the employee, whether it be individual or whether it be on a family plan. Are there changes that could be had within the cafeteria menu for healthcare benefits that would reduce the cost of premium? There are, but those would all be subject to negotiation. Unions have a 20% stake in any changes that are made. So it is something where there is good discussions, I think, that can be had on that issue. Same thing with dental coverages. But again, it's a case where we need to be able to maintain our workforces, both at the town and the school level, with qualified people to be able to continue to provide exemplary services. When we look at the capital budget, insurance, and contingencies, there's not much money there. We're talking about a 1.4. That's what we control. When I look at the bottom, I've got a category that's overtime, seasonals, and material supplies. When I look at this, the overtime by itself with the seasonal salaries is worth about 1.25 million. So you only got about 4.6 million, and that's tied up in gas, oils, electrics, as well as vehicle acquisitions. So you don't have a great deal of flexibility and try to stay within the 2% that in terms of levy growth, even with the $460,000 in new taxes from expanded base.
Steve,
You look at that on a pie chart.
can I ask a question? Or would you rather I waited till the end, or is it okay to ask now?
I like questions.
Okay, good. The overtime seasonal salary materials, that line item, does that assume a normal winter for us, or would that fluctuate significantly if, say, we had, 3 or 4
It
bad
would be
blizzards?
normal. I mean, it also includes next year, I mean, there's good years and bad years as far as canvassing. Canvassing next year, there's going to be $36,000 to pay for election seasonal. Police department, when we look at the overtime budget in the police department and EMS, and we look at the seasonal in the highway department, that's where you come up with that $1.25 million. Most of it's public safety related in terms of the overtimes. And we can control overtime based on expanding complement. What we have to look at is what the true cost is for an employee, which isn't just the salary, if we're going to be able to save more money than what the life cycle costing would be for that position for the year. So if we're bringing in a $50,000 patrol officer, and it's actually costing us $90,000 because his rate of his retirement rate next year is going to be 22.7%. So for every dollar we pay, we're paying 22 cents more for that. We're paying 7.25% for its COLA payment. So you add that on. So when you get done, you've got to look at how do you save the overtime dollars. Sometimes it's cheaper to pay overtime than what the overall cost would be if there was additional employment brought into the community. One of the other things we need to look at is what the value of unpaid time is that the person has at the end of the year. That's also a value that needs to be considered. So we look at that, but when we look at the overtime and seasonals, that budget, even though you're spending $15 or $16 million in personnel costs, you're still looking at another $1.25 million to be able to satisfy the full complement requirements that we need. I want to move on. One of the things on, the next one is the property tax requirements I wanted to talk about is, the council's aware that we made some modifications so that we could identify what truly was the general fund, and what we did is we pulled any of the transfer dollars that were tax levy that were going to other funds. So what we're looking at here is, you can see that the general fund's going to take $252,000 more. And you can see that the school fund was showing the $1,048,000. That's the 2% that Kristen will be talking about. You can see the 554 for the, was that the 2% plus? Is that what you? Well, God helps those to help themselves, but that may not be it. But what we're looking at is about a 1.9% over the adopted budget. When I adjust for the motor vehicle changes that have occurred, it would be as high as 2.37 for us to be able to fund this. But you can see, where do your dollars go from the property taxes? Senior services is picking up, the $432,000. Our rec center needs $315,000, municipal debt at the $550, and the schools at a mere $53.4. So you end up in then what we also have to look at is, what are the doubtful receivables? This is the overlay that we've always talked about. It's about, when you send out a bill, there's about 1.3% of that doesn't get paid in the first year. We've got that down to probably about 1.2 that we can take a look at, but we have to bill in excess of that. It comes back to us in the second year as a prior year tax. But, so overall, we're looking at about a 1.9% increase in what that tax levy would be if everything is the way it's here. If the schools were to receive 4%, obviously that would increase by another $1,048,000. Certainly it's not going to happen on my watch. Bottom line is, when we get to the pro forma and tax distribution, what would this budget mean to us? It would mean that we would be going from a current tax rate of about $15.31 up to $15.65. So if you go to $15.65, it's a 34-cent increase. And you can do the math. The average house is about $350,000, and multiply that times the 350 times the 34 cents. And that's what the increase would be, probably plus $100 per household. If we looked at it in terms of the adjusted base being $71,000,003, the increase would be at that 2.37. So there's significant dollars here just to be able to maintain status quo. If there's new programs that need to be introduced, then those dollars have got to be recognized, and full cost accounting for what those programs would cost need to be looked at. Just a couple of more sheets. The unaudited, unassigned fund balance. I say unaudited because it is audited. However, the audit hasn't been published as of today. We're looking at about $10.469 million that's in our fund balance. We would forecast that we would end the year with about $1 million, and we would use $600 of that toward next year's budget. We would increase from the 13.23 that we're at to the 13.47, which is the target number that I think is safe for the community. Would I like to see it higher at up to closer to the 15, 16%? I would. It provides greater opportunity for cash flow in terms of investment purposes for us to generate additional investment income through the finance department. A couple more pages. The debt service fund, which I mentioned earlier, When we set up the debt service program, we also anticipated that there would be additional bonding that would occur over the life of the 6-year capital improvement program. What we're forecasting at this point was that we would have additional bonding for the schools of $4 million. $2 million of that would go out in 2020, $2 million of that would go out in 2022. We'd have a muni bond that would be for road improvements of $500,000 that would also go out in 2020. And you can see, even with that introduction of that $4.5 million, municipal school debt service requirements would remain relatively constant. That's important for us because what we don't want to see is spikes in the value of debt service. I think that when we get into the capital budget, and based on the discussions that that we had with the state, I think that the bonding schedule will probably be delayed even further than the 2020, based on what the cycle will be with the new state aid for school construction. But I'll let that go until we get into January and we do the capital program, because I think Kristen and I still need to get some better answers as to where we're going. But some of the information that was given with a committee meeting last week are disturbing in terms of delay in improvements at the school facilities as a means of being able to get state approvals in place in a timely manner. So we can talk about that, but my point in introducing this page tonight is just simply to say we've got debt under control. We can keep debt under control, but if in fact we start seeing what the North Kingstowns or Westerlies were doing with $40 and $50 million, you can see what type of impact that would have. That's why it's going to be very important for us in that facility study to have a real understanding as to A, what buildings are going to be used, B, how are they going to be used, and what's the cost to retrofit to provide viable use. And then to be able to have hard numbers to be able to look at how do we introduce that into a debt schedule that does not penalize operational programs both at the municipal and the school level. So I think it was a very important step to move forward to try to identify what A, education programs should look like over the next 10 to 20 years, and B, how would we provide them and where would we provide them and what building necessities and build-outs are required to meet that. But once we get to that point, we also need to understand what the ability to pay is to maintain and preserve the characteristics that people enjoy in this community today. I don't mean to preach, but I got to get it all on the record. Capital budget is, last slide will be again in January. It's up about $365,000 over prior year, but the real changes would be in the school and the general fund, which are minimal. I will say that the major change that's occurring with wastewater is because of major changes that we will be making in equipment. When we built the sewer system back in the 70s, I never thought we would be replacing all of the heavy equipment on it during my tenure, but we have started. Much of that cost of the $1,023,000 is monies that will be paid for by Narragansett and URI. So that's not a number as to where either user fees for the sewer system are going to be necessary. A portion of that would be probably closer to between a third and a half would come out of user base for the sewer systems itself. So when you look at the page that looks at the capital budget, yeah, that's a big increase in terms of spending that would occur. But I also think that what we're trying to place on the record with our regional partners is all of the equipment and infrastructure changes that are necessary, showing them in 1 year, but because they're in a capital reserve fund, whether we accomplish all of those in a single year is yet to be seen. So, but we want to put on record to Narragansett and to URI, these are what your costs are projected to be when those projects are completed. The operating agreement that we set up with the two regional partners last year provides that we do not bill them until the council has awarded the contract. So they'll see what the dollars are. If they want to set them aside in reserves, they can. But they won't have direct impact as far as property taxes are concerned when you look at that type of an increase. Last item, I talked to you about retirement on a yearly basis. Somebody will say to me, well, I understand that municipal retirement, that we're totally underfunded. I want you to understand that at this point, there's $93 million in liabilities associated with pension systems for the school, for the police, EMS, and municipal. And of that amount, $80 million in assets exist. So we're at an 86.1% funded ratio. We still are in a position where changes need to occur at the police level. As you can see, that's still at the 78, and we should be getting that up over the to an 85% level. Unfortunately, the retirement board numbers are probably due out next week for us to see what the values were as of June 17. If I get those numbers, I will share those with council. But again, think about what your contribution rates are. The muni contribution's 11.7, the police 22.3, and EMS at about 4.9. So with every labor dollar that we spend, we have major cost escalators associated with what the cost of employment benefits are. So with that, I will bid an end to my presentation here and turn it over to the schools. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to address them at this point.
I have a question. Throughout the presentation, you referenced the inequities in our tax reimbursements, whether it's the car tax or the pass-through or state aid in any kind of form. Are we working on, with any of our state representatives to advocate for ourselves at the state level? Are we focused on that at all? I know it's a common theme every year, but, you know.
I think the representatives are well aware of it. I think what it comes down to is that the state's programs look at income, personal income within communities as a factor in determining what equity is. We may not agree that the 10-year program for reducing state aid to education is an appropriate formula. And when we look at the fact that we're losing between $300,000 and $400,000 a year with that, it doesn't feel right. But when you actually compute the formula itself, you can see how they're coming up with those numbers. When you look at the number of children that are on free or reduced lunches, when you look at all of those different factors that they weigh in there. I think some of the biggest problem is that the state's not recognizing what core basic service for education is, and some of the costs that are not considered in the formula that should be considered. One of them certainly is busing. But until we can get that, but the thing is, if you try to get busing included in the formula, what's going to happen is it's going to push up the number of what every school community is going to receive, which then makes it unfundable as far as the state in terms of the amount of dollars that they have available. So it's a vicious circle that you're dealing with there. Because this does, you've got an affluent community with a median family income projected at $95,000. You're not going to see the type of ratios that you're going to see in a Central Falls with a below 40 average income. So those are where you're going to be hurt. But essentially what's happening is you're going to be funding all of municipal programming through the property tax, which then is going to require displacements of lower income taxpayers that are homeowners at this point that will be forced out. So that's why there's got to be a balance. Budgeting is a process, but the process is a balance between what services you can provide for the dollars that are available. And you guys in the cheap seats are responsible for that. Yes? Chris? Where'd you put it?
Thank you so much. If you can advance it one slide, that would be, oh, great, thank you. Oh, you turned it off. Okay, I got it. Thank you. So, as you may notice, I've changed the format of the presentation this evening. I front-loaded, it's loaded into board docs for the public, sent the town council a copy of a couple of hundred pages of our demographic indicators and all of the data that we keep on hand that the school district and the school committee use in order to work through the budget cycle. We've also given you some class size information that's been something of interest to you in the past. And for this evening, we're going to focus purely on the financials. And so that starts with our pro forma. And just as a reminder, the pro forma is not our budget. It's exactly what the manager spoke of. It's showing you, based upon the different property tax transfer amounts that you may decide upon tonight, what is needed in order to just maintain the status quo, as he said. Just maintaining current contractual salaries and benefits and the state aid that we know to be coming in from the state of Rhode Island, which we know to be much smaller each and every year. This not different. So, does it also do the laser pointer? Or no? Probably not. So if you take a look at the first column, with a 0% property tax transfer to schools, we're looking at reducing out of our existing staff and programs approximately $3 million. And with the 1% reducing $2.4 million, with a 2% reducing $1.9 million, with a 3% $1.4, and then even with a 4% property tax transfer, we would need to reduce in salary and programs $896,000. We're going to come back to this slide as our last slide, so if you could hold questions regarding the pro forma, that would be great. So this is the slide that shows you what the revenue assumptions are, and the big ones are in red. We're looking at $635,000 less in reduction in state aid. That doesn't include potential reductions in group home aid. We always apply a certain amount of our undesignated funds as revenue, and that is being accounted for. We're continuing to drop in Medicare, and the Independent Transition Academy, which is the campus that we that we rent from the University of Rhode Island for special needs youngsters from 18 to 21 years of age. Our revenue from sending communities is down in that area, so we've already been advised by the other communities. In terms of our expenditures, you're taking a look at employee salaries. Each of our bargaining units contractually settled this year at a 2% increase. That certainly doesn't take into account teacher steps, employee steps, but 2% for the annual increase. That provides another $600,000. Our employee health care and dental costs, health care going up 7%. The manager spoke of, I think, 8% in your health care and 8% in your dental. We're looking at about 7% for health care and 4% for dental, which is approximately $712,000. Out-of-district tuitions, which are our tuitions largely for special education students and career and technical center students, and transportation increased by $230,000. And then we gave you all of our 3 bargaining units wage increase and copay. It's important to note that the copay for teachers was previously steps 1 through 3, 15%, 4 through 6, 17%, steps 7 and 8, 18%, and just top step teachers at 9 and 10 at 20%. That transferred to all teachers this year, steps 1 through 10 at a 20% co-share. This is our enrollment to FTE slide. You'll notice we're down 42 students, but they're sprinkled PK through 12 all over the district, and that represents a 14% change since 2008-2009 school year, and every year that our state aid has been less, we had to make decisions, as the manager described, in order to reduce. A majority of our budget is tied up in salary and benefits, and therefore, with each of the state aid drops every year since the 9-10 school year, we've dropped from 589 FTEs to 482 FTEs, a net change of 106 FTEs in that span of time, or an 18% change. So certainly our FTEs have dropped at a rate higher than our enrollment. This is our certified pension rate. It's important to note that somewhere around the 2009-2010 year, and our pensions are with the Employees Retirement System of Rhode Island for teachers. There was some pension reform, so we saw a slight reduction, and there has been ongoing pension reform, but we're back up around the 14.35% contribution from the employer and the employee. It's a match. And our non-certified pension rate has just been climbing, and that's up at 13.27. This graph shows you a visual of since 2004. And in terms of our state aid trend, we've seen a significant impact in state aid, whereas in 1996, the state was contributing almost 30% of our budget, and now we're down to less than 11% of our budget, which has been drastic. We've also noted for you 2012 to 2019 fiscal years and the funding formula step down. So please note that the funding formula is a 10-year look, so we're in year 8. And this is a visual of the state aid to South Kingstown from 1996. Our school budget history, it's important to note that every year, although we speak of reductions in salary, reductions in positions, reductions in programs, it's not a reduction in the overall budget that the town provides. So we have been, the town has been very generous to the school department. We acknowledge that. And we have moved from 2001, our budget was 36 million to date 60 million. This is what our budget has looked like. 2009, I think, was our highest budget year, and we're almost reaching that year now. This is the history of the property tax transfer to the schools, and I note it, yellow is my time as superintendent. It's easier for me to speak from the yellow, but starting in 2010, the first year, we had a 0% increase for 2 years. Also a significant impact to our employees. And then since that time, we've seen increases of 0.6, 0.3, 1.5, 0.9, et cetera, up till last year, which was a 2% increase. And this shows you a look at the property tax transfer. So much as the manager gets the question, you know, let's compare to other municipalities, we get that too, but I guess the biggest question is always, you know, we're decreasing in enrollment, so why do we always seem to need the same or in some cases more support for our students? And the simple answer is that our clients have changed and their needs have changed, and so it's really no longer fair to simply look just at enrollment. And so I've listed for you some of the barriers that we're seeing that students and families have to overcome before they even get in the door. And so there have been certainly additional supports and investments we've made as a town in order to make certain that all children can access their free and appropriate public education. And so chronic and situational poverty is something that we deal with. We're seeing higher levels of student transiency, exposure to crime, violence, drugs and conflict, substance abuse, et cetera. We have done a really good job recently with enrollment and attendance issues, but there are still students who certainly struggle to attend every day. We have many more. We've doubled our ESL student population, and it's a very different ESL student population than we saw when I first came here, with a majority of students coming from URI, visiting professors, very already literate in their native language. We're seeing, quite frankly, students like I saw when I was a teacher in East Providence that are not necessarily literate in their native language. And so that's taking a significant amount of instruction. And in some, that's a very new piece for our middle schools and our high schools. And we're still not to the point where we have sufficient staff to support English language learners in their home elementary schools. So a majority, if not almost all of our ESL students are taught at West Kingston Elementary School, and that must change. And so we've mapped out a time, and we've supported our personnel to onboard with ESL certification, but it certainly is a challenge. So, oops, I skipped over one. These are not supports that are in the current performa, but depending upon our conversations this evening and depending upon the budget as a process, these are a list of items that we need, that we've talked about at previous school committee meetings. The ESL teacher, our registered behavior technicians, and teacher assistants, those would largely be a requirement of either crisis plan or IEP or ESL student plan, and not at our judgment. We couldn't decide. If we need another ESL teacher, then we would certainly have to provide one similar to a special education teacher assistant. That would be a requirement of a student's IEP. The other pieces I talked about at our last school committee meeting, and many, if not all of you, were in attendance, but I've been working to acquire a minivan to support students, families whose students are on IEPs or 504s to meetings, because we're hearing from our principals and from our families that they don't have the transportation to be able to get there. In order to do that, if we are granted if won by grant, then we would need to provide teacher assistants certified with their chauffeur's license to be able to drive. If we had another van, certainly the IEP and 504 need would be first as a priority, but another priority would be for students in need to be able to be transferred to and from their internships. So we've written a policy that will not hold any child, will hold harmless students who don't have the ability to transport themselves, but the quality of their internship that they could do within walking distance or at the high school would be significantly different. So we certainly would like to offer that piece. We have not been a high school that traditionally was interested in offering career pathways. With the new structure of our administration and dedicated meetings with the Rhode Island Department of Education, I'm happy to report that last year, or this current year, we have 0 career and technical center pathways, and as of next year, our program of studies will show 15. Some as career pathways, some career and technical center with endorsements. We can't rely on tuition from those endorsements yet because our programs have not been approved by the Rhode Island Department of Education. They were submitted last summer, and we await approval so that we can start working with individual students on their plans internally, and also starting to attract other folks to come to South Kingstown. We also have had several conversations with our families, and they're very interested in Spanish itinerant. in the non-dual language immersion classrooms. We also have heard from our families that they would like a certified health teacher at the elementary level to teach health in lieu of what currently exists, which is our elementary teachers are responsible for teaching health. And there are a certain amount of minutes, 100 minutes of health and physical education per week that must be taught by Rhode Island law. So that is a piece that the school committee has said they would like to support, that our families have asked for. We are about to adopt an equity policy, and within that equity policy, we are going to require some support, particularly for students, but also some coaching for staff on the difference between everyone being able to access every single program in our high school and middle school in particular. So you're seeing that as something we'd like to add in. And with the addition of the career pathways and the internships, we need a teacher leader to be able to support that work. We've also invested significantly in social emotional learning, and in order to maintain this as a strong focus, it would be wonderful to be able to have a teacher leader in charge of social emotional learning, but we do recognize that would be an additional position. And we, as you know, have transitioned from having a vendor provide our family community engagement support to a full-time teacher who is a social worker. That has been a really wonderful investment. So it would be even better if we could ensure that students who struggle and who need support in grades 5 through 12 had that same level of support. I'm sorry.
Just about the family and community engagement officer, that's something that we actually recognized as a need a couple of years ago and pushed it off, and we're getting a lot of feedback from the individual doing it. I think that it's really something that needs to be delivered by 2 people. Just wanted to put that in there.
So the next slide shows our folks, the meetings that we will be participating in. Certainly a shorter list in comparison to the town council, but ours includes some of the facilities sessions. So on January 16th, we are having a work session in the cafeteria. Certainly the town council is invited to participate in that work with Robert, I was going to say Robert Lever. Hendricks, thank you. Robert Hendricks, who will be walking us through the scenarios, the different scenarios that he is recommending for our community. And then on the 30th, you joined us for the first summit. This is the second summit, where the community as a whole will vet each of those scenarios. And he is thinking that by February 6th, the school committee will approve a facilities plan. And as we heard last week at our meeting with RIDE, the RIDE folks will need the town council to also support some piece of the facilities plan before we can move forward with state funding applications and the necessities for school construction application, et cetera. And then we highlighted for you, Valentine's Day is the date that our budget is due into the town manager. So the 13th will be when the school committee adopts their might not be their final budget, but their preliminary budget to the council. And as the manager said, the budget is a process. Our objective this evening is for the 2 bodies to come up with a property tax transfer amount for planning purposes. Tonight's the first session, and we look forward to many sessions ahead. And I'm back to the pro forma estimate, which I included as the last one.
Kristen, I just had a quick question. I'm looking at your barriers to learning that we plan to overcome with the additional supports / investments. One of the questions I had, can you get a little bit more specific on housing challenges? Is that people not being able to afford, or is that people having issues currently at home, maybe not having?
Homelessness.
Okay, homelessness.
Thanks, Kristen. Thank you to the whole committee. So looking at the 2% pro forma that you have, was there a figure for some of those sort of hopes and dreams, that last slide, 1 to 2 positions with the FCE thing? To do all those things, what would the budget then have to be?
So if you take the 2%, in order for me to even, by law, we have to balance our budget. We are not permitted, Mary Ann and I, to recommend to the school committee a budget that's out of balance. And so first, before we can go to the wishes and dreams, the 3 pieces that will be required will be the first 3. So if students, we are anticipating students arriving in with IEPs that would necessitate a one-to-one special education teacher assistant, those have to be added, and then something else would have to be offset in order to maintain federal compliance. So beyond those 3 pieces, we would have to reconcile the 1.9 million if the town would give us 2%, and that would need to come out of, a majority would be salaries and benefits, very similar to what the manager said in the beginning of the presentation. We have contractual obligations, we have increases in healthcare, we have increases in salary, and therefore we need to pay based on those contracts. And as you know, almost all of our employees are contract-based employees. Therefore, a big slice would be reductions to personnel.
So it is possible if, for instance, we went ahead with a pro forma 2%, you might look at some of those options and decide that those are more important than sort of current staff that you have.
Anything is possible.
So
We've cut a lot of the low-hanging fruit. There's like not much left.
I have a question kind of following up on what Abel said. So let's assume you got the 2% property tax transfer and then you wanted everything on your wish list that you presented here. So in reality, you'd actually have to reduce the budget by $3 million because it would be the 1.9 for the 2% and then the 1.19 up to 1.19 for all the things on your list.
Can't imagine how that would be possible.
Gotcha. Okay. And I also had a question on your career pathways, which I'm really excited about. I think that sounds amazing, and I know a lot of students are going to be excited about it. So there's going to be 15 career pathways, but I noticed you only have 1 additional high school teacher budgeted specifically for that, or is it just 1 in addition to the ones that are already there, or how does that work?
So in order to create a pathway, we had to change different courses. And so there are some of our current courses that can count toward a pathway in the end upon graduation. And pathways are required under the new Board of Regents Secondary School Act. But career and technical education is a pathway where you come out with an actual licensure in addition to your high school diploma. So some of the licensure pieces that we're taking a look at, one is a certified nursing assistant. We just started a partnership with South County Hospital. So if you think about certified nursing assistant, we have to match courses within our science department and our math department, and we have to have some oversight from our school nurse teacher. Those are all current folks reassigning themselves, so teaching different courses, let's say, and some of the courses that we currently offer fit into those areas. And then someone has to oversee them when they're out on their internship. And so right now, we're starting the internships, but we're expecting many more students will be involved in internships next year. So we need a dedicated teacher leader to be able to meet with the folks from the Rhode Island Department of Ed. The RIDE folks come in, and they right now, in the next couple of weeks, are supposed to take a look at our carpentry program, at our CNA work, at our some of our medical pathways. And so someone will need to work with them in addition to our administrators, because our administrators are in RTI meetings and 504 meetings and all kinds of other meetings. So we need someone who can be that go-to person, and it will be a
Oh,
team
yeah.
leader.
I'm not disputing that you need the person. I thought it was conservative to see that. I was just curious how it affects the budget if we'd have to make building improvements for some of those programs that we're going to be offering, or equipment improvements. You know, when I hear CNA programs, I think like, do we have the right labs for that? And when I hear about the internships, are we going to be able to afford to get people to those internships, and things like that? So, and I know our carpentry program is leaves
So
a little bit to be
we
desired.
wrote we wrote an internship policy, and we don't have any changes in our facilities forecasted for these programs that start in September. So right now, our programs will function within our facilities as they are presented today.
Okay.
And, but certainly, the folks at the high school have spoken with Robert Hendricks. He knows what the pathway designs are, and he will, I'm sure, sort of tie in the future of what pathways look like to any facilities improvements going forward. So it'll only enhance to the better. But right now, when they're starting, they're just like at Narragansett High School and at North Kingstown High School, they're able to exist within our brick and mortar high schools.
I had one more question.
Yes, go ahead.
Last year, we talked about some of the title funding and it changing for this year, that we would be sharing it with all of the students that go to private schools within South Kingstown, even if they don't live in South Kingstown. Did that go into effect, and is that why we're losing some of our funding?
So there have been changes, and Pauline has been meeting with Monsignor Clark and Prout to be able to discuss their larger bite of the apple, if you will. But the significance that we're seeing right now is due to the federal education agenda, and worried very much about Title II funds. Okay. And so Title I funds and IDEA funds at this point remain intact. But what we're hearing from our federal advocacy groups is that it's much more of an unknown federal agenda than we've ever seen before.
Okay. And I actually thought of another question. I lied. I didn't have just one more. We could just chat all night, Kristen. The page that you have about the client's needs have changed. You know, some of those things like low birth weight, poor childcare options, those types of things. So are you saying that those things have all increased over the years and or just have changed your needs? And what, from a municipal standpoint, some of those problems I think are a town problem, not just a school problem. So what could we collaborate on, or what potential do you see for us as a municipality to tackle some of those problems with you?
So some of them are becoming more dramatic to date. So we are seeing an uptick, certainly in students with English language learner needs. We're seeing an uptick in different levels of homelessness. So homelessness can qualify under the McKinney-Vento Act as truly being without anywhere to live, or it can be having to live with a relative, having to live in an unstable outcome. Like I'm gonna sort of sofa crash with my family for a couple of weeks with friends and family. And so we're seeing some housing issues right now. We have in the past, but we're seeing more. And I think that the manager and the president of the South County Hospital, we meet monthly with, I represent the school department with Pauline Lisi, the assistant superintendent, and Thunder Mist is there, and Kate Brewster from the Johnny Cake Center, Washington County Coalition. So I think that that new group that's been over a year has been very helpful to us, so that we can, that's where you saw us solidify the Family Community Engagement Officer. That's where you saw the Johnny Cake Center bring forth that community health worker. That's where our idea about the transportation started coming from, that was reinforced by our principals. And so I think that collaboration has been wonderful, and I hope that it continues. I believe that it will.
Me too. I think that that's great, because I don't see these problems as your problems, you know, and I think we're all responsible for all of these things. So I hope we can find opportunities to collaborate both fiscally and, you know, just empathy-wise. I think that these are important issues. So thank you.
I just have a quick question, and it's totally on a different topic. I'm looking at the increased support and seeing it could be anywhere from potentially maybe 11 to 17 employees at a cost of $500,000 to $1.95. I don't negate the need for these whatsoever, and some of these are federally and state mandated. So this is something that we also have to be very much in tune with. But my question to you would be, what is the attrition rate for people that might be retiring this year or not coming back to be working with the students, to see how we could offset some of these costs in terms of the budget process?
That's an excellent question. I would say that 5 years ago, we had a better handle on who would retire because teacher retirements, which are also administrator retirements, were purely linked to years of service. So I'll give myself as an example. Last year was my 28th year in education. There was an option to retire at 28 years. There's an option to retire at 30, another option to retire at 32, and teachers could decide what level of pension they could live on to match how long they would need to serve. That's gone now. There still is a minimum number of years, but it's mostly age-based. So most of our, teachers got into the work when I did, right, when we graduated from from college at 21. So if you're 21, and like me, when I entered the workforce at 29 years of retirement, we're looking at like 10 more years on folks who imagined to go last year. If we have folks that came from other districts before working in South Kingstown, we only know their age, certainly, and we know the amount of years of service in our school department. It's been interesting to see who comes forward with a retirement letter. They're not necessarily on page 1 through 3 of our seniority pages. So it's very, very, very difficult to predict. And even when we have 3 retirements letters that we've received to date, folks who are letting us know way ahead of time so that they can hopefully not have one of their colleagues laid off. They know a position is coming up, so that's been very generous. But more often than not, we're not replacing them with first-year teachers. A majority of our bargaining unit members are top step. And therefore, if somebody's retiring, it usually means someone not being laid off, and they're usually already at, a high step, if not top step. So unlike other school departments, the urbans, for example, that are constantly hiring brand new people right out of college because their enrollment is not declining, they might be able to see a difference in the starting salary and the exiting salary. We haven't been able to see that lately.
Okay, no, that helps me, thank you.
So I have a couple of comments, no surprise, that I'll address the whole school committee on. I still struggle with, and I understand that you have other needs. The presentation was great this year, thank you. But when I look back in 2001 with a $36.8 million budget and probably over 30% more students at that point, and then this year being $60.5 million, I'm just not convinced that there's much more planning than the property tax transfer. It's a little bit blunt, and I don't mean to be that way, but I know there's much more planning than that. But this is a scenario that has come back year after year after year. It doesn't appear to me that anything has changed, and I was hoping that we'd have a facilities study finished at this point and maybe some sort of plan there. But again, I don't have a question. I don't expect a response. If anybody feels the need to respond to me, I'm glad to hear it.
Joe, thanks for that. I had tried to look at this, and you know where I come from on the budgeting side and the planning side. And what we're really looking at is, I try to make this as simple as possible in my own head, but we've got basically cost of living expenditures that are new, right? And this is as simple as the contracted raises that are there, much like what the town has. In addition to that, we've got a reduction of spending in some proportion to the number of student drop. It's not necessarily one for one, but it's there. But then we also have the revenue drop. So what I tried to look at is, all right, so spending goes up by 2 on wages and benefits, down by, let's say, almost 1 in wages and benefits relating to less of a need with fewer students. And then a 1.1% revenue drop from funding formula. So really simple, that gets kind of to this, all right, there need to do nothing other than those things, status quo. Whether that's good or bad is a different discussion. That's where this, kind of this 2% tracks, okay? Now, facilities thing is another issue, but that's definitely a piece of it. Now, we see this sort of wish list that was there. Those are some variable needs that are there. There's also the possibility that some of those can be addressed with attrition. You know, we do see attrition, it's normal. I think we saw a total last year, all in, of maybe 14 or 16 total resignations and retirements that occurred over the course of the year. Those are all basically separations that we can then use to accommodate some of this wish list. But the most important thing is all of that has to line up, or we make, and that gives us the ability to make these sort of subtle changes to keep everything moving in the direction that we want to, without having some massive disruption as a result of just overreacting. I was kind of making fun of the superintendent when the town manager was talking about how everything, if we plan for everything in the worst case, we then potentially overtax and limit our ability to tap into the community in the future. And they're very good at explaining what the worst case is all the time. I agree with. But there are definitely real challenges that we're also trying to deal with. So I kind of put it in my own head, a list of what's the optimum, or not optimum, but what the best case scenarios are. And those are things like taking full advantage of whatever attrition is available to not only get us to just status quo, but also meet some of these needs. What happens if we can get our legislative group to step in and say, why do the funding formula was supposed to phase in over 10 years, there's 3 years left, no towns are getting more money anymore the way they were for the first 7 years, and there's only, quote, losers now in the town. What are the chances that we could start to see a tweak in the right direction, even if it just means let's take the gap in what we're trying to get to with funding formula and spread it over 4 years instead of 3. These are ideas that we can look at to offset this. But in the end, what I was hoping to be able to do is say, as if it, or see as if it's realistic to say, with the increase in the taxable property base and a small amount for cost of living, does that make sense without anything dramatic happening? So some of that is there, and it's 18 months between now and when that spending plan ends. So
Right.
there's a lot of moving parts between now and then, and that's.
Yep, I appreciate your explanation there. So I guess I'm uncomfortable going to the taxpayer and saying, this product is going to cost you this much more again. Is this just Groundhog Day? Is this every year going to be this way? Because it's been every year this way. And I understand you all make great points, including the manager. We don't want dramatic spikes in any way. So doing it in a measured way is better. But let's just be transparent. Is this it? Is this the real world?
This is the real world. And if you want to maintain an excellent education for the students in South Kingstown, then we have to at least maintain the status quo. I mean, it just doesn't even make sense to say maintaining the status quo or less will result in higher outcomes for students, whether they be academic or social emotional learning. You know, there are all kinds of variables, including class size, including support from teacher assistants, including changes in our special education population and our ESL population. And so as our needs have changed, I mean, I think we've done, I know I've done my due diligence in terms of continuing to reduce staff, and there just gets to a point where a certain minimal staffing needs to take place because they are contractually aligned. And so I see what you're saying in terms of the overall funding, but I mean, I think about myself, my first job as a teacher in 1988, I made $6,000. I mean, that's just not what we pay teachers anymore. And certainly, you know, that was parochial school my first year, but my first year in East Providence, I probably made like $18,000. And so top step teachers and first step teachers throughout the state. I think Westerly is the highest. They're seeing 48,000 or 40,000 for a first step teacher right out of college in order to compete with other really wonderful professions that require, the intellect and the care that a teacher does. That's a big driver of what we're seeing. Pension is a big driver, healthcare is a big driver, and as I said, a majority of our budget is salaries and benefits. And you saw in 10 years a reduction of over 100 positions. And that's not come without pain.
And I get that, and you're talking about a first-step teacher being in the $40,000 range.
Not with us.
No, I know, but talk about administrators and what they cost. And I know in the real world, Roland, you're in business, I'm in business. In the real world, I'm looking at dramatically less revenue in my business than I had in 2006. And you can't run your school system like a business, I get it. But you make the hard choices, you do what you have to do. And I'm not trying to say that you're not making the hard choices, but the people who we're gonna ask to pay this bill, the majority of them are real world, and it's an affordability thing for a lot of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Could I, is it still a question? Looking at the page for increased support, are these a lot of sort of or wishes that have come out of the gap closing task force? It seems like they're very targeted in that direction.
So the
I
gap
appreciate.
closing task force starts meeting in January. And just have to get to my page so that I'm not misspeaking. But the pieces that came out of the gap closing task force last year were already put into place in so much as it could be from a purely budget, non-contractual standpoint. There were items that the school committee took from the gap closing task force into negotiations with them, but largely the interventionists, reading and math interventionists, bringing forward some more, the family community engagement position, not specifically that, but that kind of support certainly came from that work. And the gap closing task force that's re-energized is starting meeting in January, and will bring to the school committee for September additional recommendations.
Great. Well, I like a lot of these things that you have here. I think that they would be very helpful in really addressing what I see as the only hole in the educational experience for South Kingstown students and for the community as a whole. So thank you for putting those forward. I look forward to seeing how the budget process develops.
Alicia? I just wanted to respond to Joe about the budget increasing every year. And I see here for the pro forma for the town, for the municipal side, I guess that is, it assumes a 3.5% service cost increase over the adopted budget. And so if you were to apply that to our budget, that would be like 2.1 million over the cost of a year. And it's not like our fault that educating kids, costs more than, say, the police department or whatever.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm not putting blame. I'm not.
Yeah. No, I know. I think we're all here together, like, trying to figure this out for sure.
Get the best product with everybody's point of view. So.
Michelle, did you?
Okay. A couple of things here. Joe made the comment about every year, 2%. So, yes, last year it was 2%. In the prior 8 years, 7 years, the highest increase was 1.5%, and there were 2 years with 0. The last year that there was in excess of 2% increase was 2009. My other comment has to do with, we all live in the real world and we all pay these tax bills, but in reality, everything that every one of us is paying for, I'm not just talking about the salary and benefits increase, but I'm talking about electricity and water and all of those things have increased, as they do in the school department budget. Further, and this is more, I probably need Dr. Stringfellow's help in clarifying this. I want to make sure that I understand this completely. So several times since you finished the presentation, Kristen, several different people have called this increased support list a wish list. And so it's my understanding from our work at the school committee table that these first three positions that you've mentioned here will be mandated by state or federal regulations. And the remaining things on this list, I don't see this as a wish list, a wish list just seems frivolous to me, that expression. I think these are more necessities to think about in order to maintain the high level of education that we wish to provide for our young people.
Say that the only thing I would just caution on is the elementary registered behavior technicians would not be required by any law. What's happening, though, is they are required in terms of our crisis and safety needs for the individuals in the buildings. And so, yes, special education support and ESL plan would be state and federal law. But I would concur with everything else that Michelle said.
Michelle, just to respond to your first point was about the increases over the last several years. They've only asked me to chime in for 3, and it's been around 2%. So that's my real.
One time of 2%, this year of 2%, that would be the second time.
And I just wanted to respond to the comment about the wish list. I was at your original presentation of the pro forma a few weeks ago, and along with a few other town council members, and I got up then and said how much I liked all the things that were on this list. And I think Abel just also said how much he thinks that these things are important. So in no way was I trivializing these things in any kind of way. I think that, as I said in that meeting, and I'll say it again, these are all extremely important things that I wish you could include in your budget as standard. Yeah, we'll just move it over. I also wanted to say, last year I had some issues with where you were with your budget and what I thought we were getting. We were looking at an increase, but a lot of those costs were out of your hands, certainly. I like in this budget and this year that there are things in here that I think in the long term will help us. I think that the career pathways is a direction that we should be going in. And, I don't think next year we're going to see 100 new students, but I think that that will be another reason for a destination for us. I like what you're doing with the social emotional learning. I think that we're seeing districts move towards that, and I think parents pay attention to that. And the transportation issue. I hear from a lot of people that can't afford to live here, one of the big problems is transportation. And so the investment with the van and the teacher, I know you're going to hopefully get a grant for that. I think that speaks to a larger issue too, and why people can't afford to live here. We're not the kind of town that it's easy to hop on a bus and get from point A to point B quickly. So those types of things, when I see those in these budgets, I'm like, yes, and it makes the 2% a lot easier when I think, okay, well, not only are you trying to make reductions to meet your pro forma, but you're also innovating. And I realize and recognize how difficult that's going to be. Looking at your pro forma, it kind of makes my heart pound, so I can't imagine how it makes you guys feel. And I don't know how you're going to look at the creative options to get there, but I like seeing those things, and it's encouraging. So I completely understand where Joe's coming from. I mean, I don't make, when Steve talked about the median income of being $95,000, I don't make $95,000 a year. So when we talk about a $100 increase in our budget, in our tax bill every year for the average family, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a lot. And, it creeps up every year. And it just, I don't know if it was Roland or somebody was here a few years ago that said, we never see that number go down. We always see it go up. And wouldn't it be great if we could have it go up? But, you know, that's not our reality. You know, I don't see the cost of my house dropping anytime soon either. So things fluctuate, and as long as we're innovating, I'm just really excited about some of the things that I see in here, so.
And I just want to maybe try to put some clarification to the wish list, because I'm sure I was one of the ones that called it that. I think of it operationally, and how do you implement this? And in my sense, you know, you have constraints, they're real, whatever they are, they're here. We could look at this as, phase this in as variables become known, as including the property tax transfer, including some of the state funding things, including the retirement contributions. All those spending things are known, and then the actual physical people that are retiring or resigning are known. We could phase this in. When I call it a wish list, I'm saying, if you could just drop this right down and say, all right, let's hire all these people tomorrow. I'm not saying these are not, I'm not trying to even minimize this. What I'm saying is, that's how it can be treated, so.
Any more comments before we go to the public? If anybody from the public would like to come up and offer comments, please do so. Come to the podium and state your name for the record.
Can you remind us about like the guidelines for public comment? Remind everybody.
It's on the agenda, so it can be a little bit longer than 3 minutes, but typically there is a 3-minute limit to conversation, public conversations. Because there might be several people who want to speak. I don't know. We don't know. But please come to the podium and state your name. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Jim O'Neill, Wakefield. Excuse me. Kristen, down 42 kids this year. What's the preschool population? I know we spoke last year at this kind of a, if you will, conference. I know you were worried, and I was worried too, that the trend over the last couple of years with the number of preschool, this was really pretending a much lower population in the future. I think everyone should, 2 years does not make a, trend. But I know you and I were both very worried last year that we had dropped from previous years, 108, 110, 112, down to these numbers.
Last year, we reduced 2 full-time preschool teachers and 2 teacher assistants as a result of that enrollment drop.
All I'm trying to do is look out how NESDEC looks at this with the birthing population, and I mean, we could be looking at 2,500 kids if this kind of birth rate of 78, and I don't know what that translates into kindergarten and first grade, but this is a long-term trend that was just going to continue with the population decline.
With the facilities study, Jim, it's done, the school department hired a demographic study group, Cropper and McKibben, and so there's a significant analysis that they did beyond what NESDEC typically does in terms of a cohort survival projection. They did a really thorough analysis, and they are maintaining that although there will be a slight decrease over the next 10 years, it's going to stay level off and much quicker than we thought. And they're even looking at 10 years out from now, we might need an uptick. So if you'd like us to send you that data, we certainly can.
I'd love to see it, but the 2-year trend is worrisome.
Yeah, that also, the kindergarten enrollment is probably a better indicator than the preschool, because that's strictly a infrastructural piece that is constraining. Kindergarten enrollment, while total enrollment's going down, kindergarten enrollment's been flat, 209. The fourth grade class this year has 209. The incoming kindergarten class is 204. So that's been projected, and that's been sort of stabilized over the last 4 or 5 years. It's still going to, what's happening is that kindergarten class of 200 is replacing an outgoing senior class of 230. So there's where you see enrollment
Okay.
drops.
But if I multiply those numbers by 13 years, K through 12, I'm at 2,700. I don't need, maybe you don't need to hire those folks. I'm just taking a look at what is actually happening out there right now. Just a couple other points here. What's our transportation budget currently in the current year? Okay. When does that contract come up? Is that every 3 years? Is that annual contracts? What?
The board was a couple of years ago. I think we did a 5-year award on that.
Okay, when did we start, or when does it complete?
I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know the exact start date, but it was a 5-year award. I think we have another 2 years, 2 to 3 years on it. What I'm seeing statewide is those folks that are going out to bid, the costs are coming in pretty significant. I think it's due to lack of competition. There's only a couple of vendors in the state.
Yeah, I noticed that's and that is the problem. You have to bid up for their services. Okay, anyway, it's not this year, not the coming year that.
No, it's not.
Okay. In the immersion program, how many personnel attached to that program? Both certified, non-certified, however it's ranked.
The dual language immersion program, second grade is a second grade. So it's not any extra personnel than a typical second grade teacher would need. It's still a second grade teacher. It's a second grade teacher that speaks Spanish. Originally, we hired a dual language immersion ESL coordinator who's largely spending her time with the ESL needs. That was the only budget implication at the time. And at this point, with our ESL needs in the last 2 years, we would require an ESL coordinator just for the ESL students.
Okay, but how many folks involved with this program?
So 47% of our students in K through 2 are in the dual language immersion program. So 47% of affiliated staff.
And the staff number?
I'd have to get back to you, Jim. It's 4 kindergarten teachers, 4 first grade, 4 second grade, and then next year 4 third grade. But if they weren't teaching dual language immersion, they would be teaching straight second grade.
Okay, and this program is planned out 6 years, 8 years?
This particular program, the way it looks now, will go through 5th grade.
Go through 5th. Okay, I'm just about done. I had a question for Steve on pensions here. These numbers that the governor, treasurer then, governor now, put together, are we over the hurdle with these increases of our pension costs for the retirement funds, or has it been pushed out further? At what point did that bell curve, I thought we were supposed to see a significant reduction in the percentages that taxpayers have to put into the programs?
It'll go way out. It goes out, the amortization period was 27 years. So we're probably 5 years into that, is mid-30s.
So we won't see any reduction then for,
I don't expect that you will. The only way you'll see reductions if there's investment returns are significantly higher than what had been predicted, but still that's 7.5 as an annualized return rate.
yeah.
I think in and by itself, it's too high.
Yeah, it certainly is. These rates you put in here, the certified pension rate, non-certified, are those also the 5-year averages that the state uses for?
Speaking about mine?
What page are you talking about, Jim?
Well, I'm sorry, just our certified pension rate, the percentages that are up to 14.35% here. But is that a 5-year average, or is this an annual?
Are you looking at the school side or the town side?
School side.
Okay.
Those are annual percentage contributions, Jim. Those are not averages, those are actuals.
I think what you're missing is that they've got the rate there for federal employees. Federal employees is including the FICA requirement with it. There's a larger cost with the federal employees that the school system's responsible for.
Okay, all right.
Federal employees, we're anticipating a 23.51% for this,
Okay.
for next fiscal year, the budget year we're working on.
But the state pension account is based on a 5-year average, is it not? To achieve that 7.5% return, so on and so forth?
It's an annualized rate of 7.5%, but
Right.
what they do is they have a smoothing where they look at what the average has been over a 5-year period, so that they come up with what the rate is. So you could have several years at 10%, and next year could be 2%, but it would bring that up.
Yeah. Okay, so that is still a 5-year rule.
It's 5-year smoothing as far as the formula they use now.
Okay, so we can't count on a market increase year like we've had this year then for the next 4. I know, okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. If anybody else would please like to come up and have any comments, state your name for the record.
Good evening, Tara Apperson. I live on Allen Ave. I was wondering, why is the transportation budget going up? Is there?
The cost for the buses, has gone up.
And there's no like way to negotiate with all that we
No,
pay already?
No way, and keep in mind, be 64 square miles.
Yeah.
This is a large community geographically.
The other question I had is, does the decrease in full-time employees that's in the slide include administrative employees? Yeah. Okay, and then I just wanted to address you all and say, you know, I've heard some of you on the council side mentioning 2% a couple times, so I'm glad I'm not hearing 0. I actually think it should be more than 2%. I want to remind you that last year we actually saw an increase in our budget, yet with necessary expenditures in salary, healthcare, teachers that we needed to hire, our schools and students and teachers still have suffered. We decreased our materials budget. I'm hearing at the high school that their paper budget, copy machine budget, was cut in half, and they're buying their own paper. If we don't provide materials I heard it directly from teachers at the high school, so I'll let them know that you don't think it's true, but if we don't supply our teachers with basic necessities, morale goes down. So please make sure in the budget that you're about to look at coming forward when we're seeing where these creative cuts are going to be from, that we're really paying attention to what the impact is. At Wakefield, one of the 2 special ed teachers was cut in half and sent to Matunic, so essentially Wakefield lost a quarter of its special ed support. I doubt that they lost a quarter of their special ed students. And we've eliminated 107 employees over the past 9 years, and many of them were support staff. So please, when you're looking at this budget, you know, it's not just a bottom line, it's not just a number, there are major impacts. And so I see with a 2% increase, we're looking still at almost $2 million, and that is devastating. So I think it should be 4%, which is still devastating. Thank you.
Any other further comments from the floor?
No one else is coming up. I just had one more question, or one more comment. Thank you. Jim O'Neill again. Actually, Kristen, I sometimes give you some tough questions, but I appreciate the work you've done here. I don't think a lot of folks here on the council or in the audience understand, and I don't have my paperwork with me, but you know, from 2000 to 2005 or 6, the annual budget increase of the school department, we were looking at 9 and 10%. We walked it down to 7%, to 6, to 5. So Kristen really walked into a buzzsaw here when the recession came along at the same time. And that was when we opened Broad Rock. And we went in 2 years after we opened Broad Rock, with the population declining in 2001, 2002, we went from 519 FTEs to 622 in 2 years. So you can see, along with that 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5% compounded 5-year increases of the school budget, you can see the difficulty you're all facing here. We're still working that off, those increases. There were comments, front page of the newspapers. School department caused some structural deficits. They were spending surplus monies. That was front page of the newspapers, front page. So we're making up for a lot of that, and it's terrible because the kids are involved here, but it all goes back to the issue of just how costly Broad Rock was to open. So I hope with the facility studies we learn something. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else care to come up to the podium? Any other questions from the table?
So, from the school committee's perspective, are you satisfied with the, I mean, maybe you can just go down the line of what do you think is appropriate, the 2%, 3%? You have an advocate from the audience that says 4%. I'm just curious where the committee's at, because we get this menu of options, but you guys know the operations of the schools obviously a lot better than we do.
I think we can see that 2% is obviously going to be difficult, but I think that listening to Steve talk about some positions being repurposed at the town level, I know it's much fewer positions, but that we can hopefully get to this list of what we see and have heard is a critical need for the schools by doing some repurposing of positions. And I do think that I hope that we can come to something with the facilities study that looks at a little bit of savings, cost savings for the town, because I think that was the request from you guys last year came with, you know, hopefully some savings tied to that facility study. So I don't know that we'll see that next year, but I think that 2% would be the minimum that I would hope for from the town.
Okay.
I just want to chime in that I think the 2% minimum is a good idea. I was looking over some of the positions on the list of needs, and some of these have the potential, actually, like, I know everyone realizes the opioid epidemic is really bad in the United States, and South Kingstown's not isolated from that, and there's really not a lot of federal or state support for programs, developing programs that might offset that. And so I think like a couple of the positions in this list are actually going to be individuals focused on implementing evidence-based programs that are linked to developing skills that offset the likelihood of an individual engaging in substance abuse and use in general. And it's really targeted at a critical age in elementary school. And so I think it's something for our town to consider, you know, a couple of these positions, like couple $100,000 or whatever it is, if we can put that forward towards these programs, you know, it's an investment that's going to pay off. It's absolutely worth it. You know, we do lose people in South Kingstown and kids in general, or people in general, kids that went through our school systems to the opioid epidemic. So it's just something I want us all to consider.
Thank you.
And the whole point was that 2% is definitely like, hopefully the lowest, and not the ceiling of what we're going to consider getting.
But I think we do, as you all recall, need that direction from you, for Kristen and Mary Ann to build the budget. So I think last year we went kind of round and round in terms of It wasn't really clear from the town council to the school committee and to Kristen and Mary Ann what that number is. So we can't go back and have our meetings and build a budget on 2% and then get kind of into this jockeying and getting people really, really anxious in the town. I think we have to figure that out. And if it's not 2%, then it's not. But we can't. I think that caused a tremendous amount of angst in the community last year, and I don't want to see that happen again.
So just a comment on process, though, is it that we ask you for a specific amount and you say yes or no, or, I think we kind of dance around this every year, or do you guys say, we've heard what you've had to say, we hear you, and this is the amount we want you to build the budget on? Like, how does that, what are, the process?
Basically, I was at a certain part of the last meeting, but that was more for the facility study, legacy study, if you will. So this is our first real run at the entire budget, if you will, and talking about this in conjunction with Steve and his presentation tonight, I would certainly not be committed tonight to make a decision based on what I feel is a necessary budget, but I'm speaking for myself personally. And I absolutely hear your point, because Raisa, what you said was definitely what was happening last year, and you didn't know where to go because you really didn't have much direction from us. So at this point, I don't know what to say, because I mean, we have figures for, 0 to 4%, and if we ask you to basically give us what would have to happen in each scenario, that's way too much work for you, and I don't have that expectation personally of all of you. But I do want to be realistic in generally what the needs are. So I don't know. I'd ask for advice of fellow councilors.
So what I had to say last year was that I'm not prepared tonight because this is a process, and
So you
we
need
need
to give
to-
us a direction tonight.
we need to
and that's
digest
what has
an awful
happened
lot of-
every year except last year. Every year except last year that I've worked here, this is my 10th year, we leave, Mary Ann and I, with a number that we're expecting to build our budget on. And then our first meeting in January, which will give her literally 2 weeks to get this ready for them to start cutting, because that's what we've had to do for 10 years, is in vain if we don't have some direction. And so certainly that direction can change as you did last year. Last year, you, I believe, gave it to us at 0. We left here at 0. And then we came back and it became 2. And so there were other years where we were at 2 and then it sort of dipped below 2 or et cetera. But we need some sort of a range. That's the purpose of tonight. And so Steve has embedded the 2% figure in his pro forma. So is that what you'd like us to use, the 2% that he's embedded? Or are you changing that up or down to give us direction this evening?
if you're asking me directly, this is a process, and I need to digest an awful lot of information over the process. Having said that, I said this to you last year. You need 3 votes. So,
No, but you don't vote on it tonight.
no, I
You
know.
vote on
but-
it
But
in
you're looking for a
March.
consensus.
So we could build on 4, and then
I would either.
what would you build on?
I think we all have our own personal experiences with budgeting, and it's not even negotiating, but coming to a number that I think is good for the schools, good for the community overall. What you don't want to see also, I think, is a referendum on either side of it. So I think you have to be careful with that. In terms of a number, I mean, like I've seen this twice. I saw it at the summit. I stayed for the, maybe not the summit, the last school committee meeting. I stayed for the last part of the budget. And when I saw the negative numbers, it definitely concerned me. I don't know if we can, as a consensus, as the council, without discussing the budget, can come up with a specific number. But if I was someone that was looking at putting something together, I think I would start somewhere or do 2 different options, somewhere between 1% and 2%.
But that's like a repeat of what we did last year.
Can I just chime
Go
in
ahead.
for a second, and then I'll try to acquiesce the floor. So The list from last year that you, is not different. So when I go to the cut list, they are the same variables that we're working with last year. We didn't add positions last year to be able to say, oops, we tried that and we don't need it. We tried this and there's been some sort of attrition. So the same areas that I would need to go to for the, let's take, you spoke of one, $2.4 million is not anywhere near where I needed to cut last year to come, to bring you, I can't even put words to it. You've not seen $2.4 million worth of cuts in
Correct.
last year. Last year, what moved you from the 0 to the 2 was not cutting everything that was on our cut list. So that entire cut list will not be new to you. It will not be new to the school committee. It'll be the same as it did last year. So you have not just one meeting's worth of experience, you have the entire time each one of you has served on the council. The cut list has not changed in terms of we will preserve core instructional programs. We will look to outside vendors first as a place to not lay off a member of our bargaining unit. We will look to cut outside vendors. We have to. It's one of the pieces. And so that's the barometer that shapes, what part of this scale that you're comfortable with us starting on. That can change, so if you take a look at, what it looks like at a 2 or at a 3 or whatever these two groups talk about being comfortable on.
Right.
And you see that because we put it into an actual budget for you. And then you have 2 to 3 months to decide what you're comfortable with. But we need a place to start.
And
But
Kristen, just for clarification, I don't think there was a consensus at this table for 0 last year. We were somewhere between 1.25 to 2. Those votes that were taken, those multiple votes that were taken that night were between 1.25 and 2. There was not a consensus at the table for
That's
0.
That's how there was discussion, but that's the consensus is absolutely
Right.
accurate, Joe. The thing that I'm looking at too is, and this can work. We have feedback here. I don't think we're asking you to vote on it. We've already heard what you say. We can maybe derive a consensus from our own as individuals and start working this through.
We certainly are not going to vote on it tonight. There's no
That's what I'm
question
saying.
about that.
That's exactly what I'm saying. There's plenty of-
Personally, this is here nor there. I wish we had results of the facilities study, but regardless of the fact that we don't, that's not going to affect your budget next year. So that's longer term. So I would personally say let's start with 2% and see what it really looks like personally. However, I'm not necessarily saying I'm going to agree that 2% is the number. But I think it's a middle ground to start with, if you will. And unfortunately, it might mean that you have to do more work if we're not in agreement with that 2%. And fortunately, if we see that there's a need for more, then it gives us a place to go. But irregardless of that, there's still going to be concessions or additions that will have to be made. This is nowhere.
What I would say, Meg, to that also is that, in addition to what you just said and what Joe said as well, this concept of a Groundhog Day, I want to try to make sure we're also looking at things a little differently, where we might be able to say, let's not come back to this with a quote cut list. Let's look at this and say, all right, how can we
do
are
things
these
differently?
variables- How can they all help us deal with whatever guardrails you decide to put in place?
I guess the other,
That's
one
kinda-
other quick thing would be like a better understanding of, we're talking about attrition, people potentially leaving, could be 0, could be 10 in terms of retiring. What is the average savings per person, as an example?
Those are numbers I would expect that they would be looking at, and those are numbers that are in my head.
Right.
It also depends on what the needs are, because if you have someone that, in a perfect world, you have one person, say, in an elementary grade retiring, and that happens to coincide with a next year where we can actually not hire another elementary grade student because the enrollment's so low. That's a good scenario to have, because you can let attrition totally become savings without changing class size, product, anything, you know what I mean? But then there's the other flip side of that, is what happens if 15 people retire that need to be explicitly replaced, and we still don't get around to some of these other needs. Those are all these variables that are coming into play right now. So, and I think at some point when we look at these guardrails a little differently, we might be able to have this conversation be a little bit different.
I agree.
I mean, I think what you can probably come away with is that I don't think anyone's going to say, okay, right away that we need 4%, right? So I don't think anyone here is saying that you need 0. Somewhere in the middle, present that to us, and we can go from there.
I think we have to look at, Roland's point is very well taken. And I also have to look at it this way. Could we save money because we have that many less students in the past 10 years? We probably could. But do we also have a cost of living? A cost of, no matter, we still have the same number of schools that have to be kept up to standards, that still have to pay water bills, sewer, whatever, electric bills. And then we also might not have to buy as much equipment because we have less students, but we also have to maintain a technological standard so that we can still be rated one of the top school systems in the state. And that, to me, is important. But by the same token, we're not here to give away the store either. And I know you all know this. This is my 6th year doing this. And I look at it at a lot of ways, and I've had a lot of phone calls, and I'm sure you guys have too, and emails as well. No funding, 0%. There's so many less students. You guys better not approve anything. And then I really have to have a conversation with people, because it's not all about no funding. We still have to educate children. We still have to maintain buildings. And we still have a standard of reputation that has to be considered nothing but excellence, in my mind, if we want to keep our good bond ratings, our good students going on to, whether it's technology careers or to college education. It doesn't matter to me where they go. It's the environment in which they're nurtured. And I'm not going to give away the store and approve 4%. I can tell you right now I won't. But I think if you're looking for a basis to start, okay, let's start right in the middle. And you might have to go back and do more work either way. And, I've always been an advocate for the schools, and I think we all can speak the same language in terms of that. It's a process, and it's hard to give you an answer tonight because certainly there is a lot to digest, and I absolutely 100% agree with Joe on that point.
Yeah, I think just looking at a pro forma looking at a budget that's so out of balance by a lot, that's what makes it hard to look at that and figure out, like, okay, well, what are they going to do to put it in balance, and what's going to be added? And it is really early in the process, and if you want us to commit to a number, I have no problem telling you what I think, but also, that could change. We could say more, we could say less based on what we see. So we can certainly give you, I can certainly give you a starting point from my perspective, but to say that, like, to Rais's point about it causing community angst, she's totally right. People came out and told us exactly what they wanted, and frankly made the decision a lot easier when you've got a room full of people telling you this is how I want this to go. But it's hard to hear that and think, like, okay, well, we caused this angst because we didn't stick to what we told you today, and this is a process. We're going to have a lot more information between now and then to digest, and I know you say the cuts don't change, but looking at a $2 million reduction, I'm sure that's going to look a lot different than the reductions that you had last year, because that's a lot more. So, I'm eager to see what that looks like so that we can figure out what's appropriate here. But I'm happy starting at 2%.
Meg?
Yes.
Let me try to bring this a little bit more into focus, because on an annual basis, we start with a pro forma, and we say the midpoint on the pro forma with a 4% cap is the 2%. And we try to develop on both sides of the budget that. But let's talk about where it goes from here. The school department's going to prepare a budget. It's going to have line item detail, and what we will do at the municipal level is we will sit with school administration subsequent to the superintendent's budget and talk about what each of the object codes are and we'll look at what those expenses are from year to year in past years. You know, we're talking as if the budget here that's presented on the expense statement on her pro forma is a bottom line number, which is a legitimate number that meets everything that is necessary for that. It's not. What they are going to do is they're going to prepare a budget with all of the detail. It'll then be submitted. We will sit down and we will go over and say, well, what does that bottom line look like? Are there adjustments that can be made in any of the line items that are put forward? If we look and we see that a line item has been budgeted at $50,000 a year, and we've only been seeing $20,000 worth of expense, there may be a need to make an adjustment on that, and we would inquire as to why that could be done. Many years in the past, whether it, we've sat down with the school department and said, we think you can make these adjustments. Each budget message, we would say, we have recommended adjustments to the budget, not touching program of X number of dollars. Sometimes it's 100,000, sometimes it's 300,000. One time it was $500,000. What it comes down to is, it is a budget process. We start out with the school pro forma tonight and the municipal pro forma tonight. We look at a target and we say, if in fact you're going to lose $650,000 in state aid, if you're going to lose outside tuition by $100,000, and if you're going to lose Medicare dollars by $70,000, you can't stand still with that budget. So you know there's going to be, to stand still, there's going to have to be changes made. But my point to you is, let the budget process go through where the schools give us the budget, we sit down, and we say, we agree that if this program is run, this is how much it's going to cost you. If you're going to add additional things, these are what it's going to cost you. You know, the budget process is such that the manager is supposed to recommend a budget to you, not based on it being 2% or being 1.9%. It's supposed to be based on what does the manager see as the needs of the community, both in balance. How much can people pay and how much do they need? That's really where you need to go at this point. I think we have traditionally used the 2%, knowing that that's a starting point. We then evaluate what the actual expenditure history has been by each of the different budget components. This isn't just the schools. We do this on the municipal budgets as well. Then we come up with what do we think is the bottom line to provide a budget, and we look at what those costs are. If the amount works out to be 2.2% more on the school side, then that's the budget that the manager is going to give you. If he, in conjunction with the finance director, says it should be only 1.9, that's what they're going to return. They're certainly not going to be out advocating for new program, but they're going to be looking at what's the base program that the schools are attempting to run. And, you know, you can have somebody come in with 4%, you can have somebody come in with 0. From here, what you need to do is to put the budget out, look at the detail of it, find out what can be done one way or the other, and then at that point, the council's going to have to make the final decision on if 2% is appropriate, whether 0 is appropriate or 4 is appropriate. But let the process work out.
Agreed.
So just to clarify, I think what you might have heard on this side of the table was 2% seems like a good target. Personally, I think at 2%, you're going to be looking at some of these other mandated things, and you're going to have to find efficiencies for, you know, smaller than this 500 to 1.195 million of extra, you know, sort of expenditures. But I think the schools should be, you know, rewarded for finding those efficiencies and making those hard choices. And I think we should be willing to go a little more than 2% in order to get some of these other really important investments in the education of our students. So, I don't think 2.5% is out of the realm of possibility. I just want it to be thoughtful, you know, in terms of the educational experience that we're providing.
So from here, I guess we're gathering that it is a process, and maybe we start right in the middle at the 2%, and it's presented to the manager and the new town manager, and and then we'll go from there, and we'll look at it and see, you know, what additions we can make, what deletions have to be made. It's a work in progress, actually. Any other comments before I make a motion to adjourn?
Thank you for having us.
Oh, you're welcome. I know it's a lot of work. I feel bad for you guys. It's a real lot of work. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 We are adjourned at 9:31.